Hi, today from the paradise like Barbados. Today we'll be talking about how to use traveling to create your competitive advantage. See you after the short break. You know certainly the saying that you get educated when you travel. Travels educate. This is a slogan, but you can really work on your competitive advantage, on your personal competitive advantage, and expanding on what I was talking about in the video from Grenada that I will link here below. You will see this is one of the methods how you can improve your competitive advantage, or how you can find or create your competitive advantage. And I will give you today a very good example, an extremely impressive example how you can create your competitive advantage through traveling. Behind me you can see the so-called George Washington's house. Why is it called George Washington's house here in Barbados? George Washington was the first American president, so how does it connect here to Barbados? So this is the house where George Washington lived in 1751. He came here with his brother Lawrence, who was sick with tuberculosis, and the doctors advised him to come to Barbados or to the Caribbean due to the climate, that this climate could cure him, or at least help him fight the disease. His brother died 2 years later, so it didn't help me much. But what George Washington, and he was 19 when he came to Barbados, what George Washington learned here in Barbados gave him an extremely competitive advantage and allowed him to make a fabulous military career, political career, and also to become fight the British, to win against the British, and to create a new country, right? To get the independence for the United States and to become the first president of the United States. This is amazing career that you can hardly imagine a better political or military career than George Washington did, with his experiences that he gathered here in this house. So let's start with what he learned here. The first, agriculture. George Washington learned about the sugarcane industry. Of course, it was based on slavery at that time, but we are not talking about ethical and moral categories. These were different times. This is how the world worked at that time, and this was one of the most profitable industries in the world, sugarcane industry. He learned everything about how it works, and also here in the Barbados they were extremely innovative as far as the agriculture is concerned, and mainly about sugar plantations, about sugar processing, about fertilizing, about different agricultural technologies. They were much more advanced than the British colonies, and he imported that knowledge to his, so to say, assets in Virginia. Because actually, when he came here, he wanted to become a large landowner, and today you would say farmer, but of course it worked differently at that time. You were the landowner and you had your employees and maybe even slaves and managers who just took care of the everyday business, and you were doing the I would say business development part. So he learned a lot about agriculture, This is one thing. Then he learned also a lot about military, because his brother was a military official and had some offices in Virginia and had some connections to military people. So he introduced him to the, so to say, big fish here on Barbados, to the military personnel, to the military authorities, let's say, here in Barbados. And George could learn everything about how you organize a fort, how you build a fort, how you organize military, how you lead people, soldiers. He learned a lot about leadership, about the structure of British force, about British military, British army. So this was very helpful later to actually fight against British, because he knew a lot about how British military is organized. So he knew the strengths, the weaknesses, the weak points, the caveats of British military, and who could effectively fight British military. Then he got a lot of connections, not only in the military sphere, but also among the royalty, British royalty, who also like visited maybe here Barbados, but also whose families were here and so on. So he got introduced, because when you are on travels, you are like among expats, you are in a minority, and especially expats of your country, of your nationality, they are not that many. So you get to know each other on an informal base, much closer. They weren't wealthy people when they were in the States or in the, let's say, British colonies in the Northern America. But his brother married quite successfully in the sense that married good money, so to say. But he himself wasn't married at that time and didn't have connections. And since his father died when he was 11, they got kind of maybe not financial trouble, but they didn't have enough money, for example, to send him to Europe for education, which his brother enjoyed, but George couldn't afford, or the family couldn't afford to send him to Europe for education. So we don't know what education he actually had, but a lot of education he got through experience, through like in real life. This is the best education, street smarts, right? You call it today. But here on Barbados, he got introduced to many influential people. They were like weekly entertainments, meetings among British here in Georgetown, in the capital of Barbados. Also theater plays and so on and so on. So intellectual meetings. He got many connections, and when he returned to the States, he got referred, he got introduced by these people to very influential people in Northern America, in the colonies, in the British colonies, that helped him with the career. And then he also contracted smallpox here on Barbados. And since he was 19, and you need to know, at that time, this is the middle of 18th century, smallpox was a big thing. When you contracted smallpox, you had a 20 to 50% chance of dying, right? So 2 to 5 people out of 10 were dying when they got infected with smallpox. And for example, in the wars, be it in Europe, be it in Northern America, be it in the Caribbean, more soldiers died of smallpox than from the hand or by the hand of the enemy, because when you are stuck together, when you are close to each other, you get these diseases, infectious diseases spread immensely and easily. And this is especially a problem in military, when when people just stay close to each other, They are, in the barracks, whatever, in the trenches, or on the ships, and so diseases spread quickly. So smallpox was a big issue at that time. But George Washington got infected here on Barbados with smallpox and survived. He was quite ill, but didn't there was no damages that he took from smallpox. He survived, and it made him safe from smallpox for the rest of his life. He wasn't able to get infected again, and that was a very helpful thing in military career, because if you were when you survived smallpox, you couldn't be infectious again, you couldn't be infected again, so you were safe for service and also safe for the others, so you couldn't spread the disease. You could move easily between also the sick and the healthy, and so on and so on. And so it gave him additional edge for his military career. And one more thing that he learned here was, of course, economy. He learned about this sugarcane business, and he realized this is like, let's say, 75%, 80% of the economy of the Caribbean. And for the British, it was extremely important. The Caribbean were extremely important, especially due to that sugarcane industry, or sugar industry based on sugarcane, and of course also slave labor, and so on and so on. And what George realized, that the money, the profits that the British took from the colonies in Northern America, so what later became United States, and from the colonies here from the British colonies in the Caribbean, this is incomparable. I mean, it was much more on the Caribbean. It's not like it was just 10 or 50% more from the Caribbean than they get from Northern America. No, it was like more 5 times as much from the Caribbean than from the Northern America. So he realized if British would need to fight on 2 fronts in the States, in Northern America and in the Caribbean, they would always go for the Caribbean, because they just get much more money out of the Caribbean. There is much more to lose, and there is much more to win if they defend Caribbean. So in later career, all of that realizations, experiences helped George Washington a lot. First, he opted for immunizing military, the American military. That meant there were immunization methods, kind of vaccines maybe, against smallpox. There was a high death rate, but it was like 1 to 2% death, instead of when you get contracted with smallpox, you would get 20 to 50% death rate. So it is, at that time, it was possible, like politically possible, to sacrifice 1 or 2% of your soldiers, and then the rest were safe for forever. So he opted for, and they organized a vaccination, mass vaccination of American soldiers, and this gave them an additional strength in the army. This was one thing. The other thing was, of course, the connections. He could, get promoted faster in the American military, like the military in the colonies who fought for independence. Then he knew about, the weaknesses and so on, and the strength of British military that helped him fight against British. At some point he was responsible for the entire American military. Then he also knew about this sugarcane business, about how the British strategize, like on the strategic level, right, like geopolitical level. He knew that if he managed to open 2 fronts for British in America and in the Caribbean, they would always go for Caribbean. and he knew that American colonies couldn't defeat British military if the entire British military was against them. But maybe they could be successful against a small part of British military. And what he did was he struck a deal with, I guess, French and probably also Dutch to fight for, to fight at the same time, to open two or three fronts against British. The Dutch would and the French would fight for some of the islands, and the Americans or the British colonies would fight for independence against British. And this is exactly what happened. What happened was exactly what George Washington predicted. The British concentrated 75% of their force, of the military force, on the Caribbean, and only 25 on the colonies in Northern America. And this was a force that was much more manageable for the Americans, and they became successful against British and were able to become independent, right, to win the independence. So you see, unbelievable things. And you need to know the Barbados travel was the only travel, like the only foreign travel by George Washington. He never left mainland America before and never after. He's just spent once in his life several months here on Barbados, and it gave him such a competitive advantage, such an edge against all other competitors in the States, but also against the British, who later he fought against to become independent and to create a new country, to create his own country, so to say, America, who later became the empire and is still an empire till today. So great things, and I wish you also to use your travels in such a way that you create your competitive advantage, not only to learn but also to get experience, to get contacts, and that will give you an edge against your competitors. This is how you get forward in life. I wish you that. I hope you like this video. Give me a thumb up. If not, of course, thumb down. Subscribe if you haven't. Press the bell button in order to get the notifications. Share this video with your loved ones, with your friends. One day they will thank you for that. I talk here a lot about how to do great impossible things in life and business, how the best entrepreneurs in our life, in our world think and act, how our billionaires think and act. I talk a lot about economy, money, sometimes about cryptocurrencies. So if you like this video, you will certainly like my other videos. I invite you to watch them. That's it for today from Georgetown, Barbados. I wish you a fantastic day. Let's do something extraordinary today.